Star today. This is what you saw. I'm going to read it to you because it is a little hard to see. Death returns to Gaza. Above the fold, right there, I'll pose. This is my prop, like Netanyahu. Everyone's got to have a prop right now. But for us, this is where we really draw the red line. An inflammatory and sensational headline. Not that what had happened was Israel had been on the receiving end of really serious terror, which came in the form of an anti-tank missile which was fired at an Israeli jeep, seriously injuring 4 Israeli soldiers, but also in the past about 48 hours, Israel has received over 100 rockets. But what was the headline that the Toronto Star appropriated? That death returns to Gaza. So it focused on the one-sided element about the Israeli strikes on Gaza. It didn't couch them as defensive measures. It didn't provide appropriate context. If you go to the photo that the Toronto Star elected to display, it shows an image of a wounded Palestinian in a hospital. So again, not denying that didn't happen, that there isn't a wounded Palestinian. That is accurate, but it is giving a slanted perspective. A more neutral perspective would have talked about how Israelis were seriously injured, how Israelis have borne the brunt, not just in the past couple of days, but in the past 10 years, a decade, of very serious terrorism. So that's not what the Toronto Star elected to tell to Canadian readers of its publication. Now, the Toronto Star has done some really poor reporting recently. I'll give you a couple examples. A couple of months ago, it permitted the publication of a commentary which had said, you know what, it's understandable and justifiable for Palestinian terrorists to have murdered Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympic Games. They actually permitted that. They published it, and when challenged by our organization, they stood by it under the mindset of freedom of speech. Again, keep in mind, they justified publishing the murder of innocent civilians. This was a claim by a commentator, and they justified publishing it on his website. A couple of weeks ago, they carried a commentary by a pundit, basically saying that the Israeli government, under the auspices of Benjamin Netanyahu, is pulling the strings of our foreign ministry. In other words, the Canadian government's decision to close its embassy in Iran and to evict the Iranian diplomats out of Ottawa was because Netanyahu controls Canada's foreign policy. Now, this is really just odious. It is something you expect to see in the annals of Holocaust denial websites. It is a nasty conspiracy theory that this publication permitted. I wish I could say that this is an isolated incident. I wish I could say that this is just a couple of mistakes made by junior editors, but it's not. We've had to deal with respect to the Toronto Star, we've had to deal with very serious, egregious instances of bias, and it's not just isolated in Toronto and Canada with respect to media bias, but it's international. Last week, a commentator on Irish television described Israel as cancer, and that Israel is being berated as a parasite even. And just a couple of months ago, on a Swedish newspaper called Aftonbladet, there was a reporter who said that Israelis are harvesting Palestinian organs. Now, again, these are claims which don't lack any kind of verification. There's no veracity to confirm the allegations. But what did the media do? They reported really conjecture and hearsay as being valid instead of doing fact-checking. Now, at Honest Reporting Canada, our job is to make sure that the media are held accountable. We are not blatant apologists for the government of Israel. We just want Israel to be given a fair shake by the media. Our specific mandate is to ensure fair and accurate media coverage of Israel. My day job is I walk into my office, I review everything that the Canadian media have done, and if their reporting, which is critical of Israel, is accurate, if it's fair, contextualized, and balanced, then that's okay. We are not, again, blatant apologists, but we don't see that oftentimes. I want to start off by talking about what the definition of media bias, and I know we have selection of which events will be reported, and how they are covered. The term media bias usually refers to a pervasive or widespread bias contravening the standards of journalism, rather than the perspective of an individual journalist or an article. What's important to point out there is that this definition doesn't specifically focus on intentional bias. In other words, it's not that somebody wakes up and says, you know what, I hate Israel, I hate the Jews, and I'm going to report something very critically, although it could be. But it can also be unintentional bias, which is that over time, poor reporting, which really just puts a magnifying glass on Israel, which is about talking about what's going on in geopolitical events, talking about the broad spectrum of issues facing the broader Middle East. That also is part of media bias. But there are a lot of impediments for reporters to do good coverage of the Middle East. To start off, we tend to think that our journalists are experts. And a lot of them are really top-notch reporters. Specifically with the beat of the Middle East, you have to be at a very senior level, but the reality is they're not historians. They aren't totally informed about every issue. They don't know who the key players are for the most part. They don't know the facts. A lot of the times you don't see the context about the history, which has gone on for decades and hundreds of years, thousands of years even. Oftentimes the reporting that they give us is jaded and whitewashed with respect to the lexicon that they appropriate. Oftentimes terms, when they describe terrorists, what kind of terms do they use? We see militant, right? We always see the militant, which, we all know that the definition of a terrorist is when an individual or group intentionally tries to murder civilians for political purposes. It is a very easy definition, and yet our media whitewashes it. We see terms like guerrilla, insurgents, activists, politicians. Just because people wear suits doesn't mean that they're not a terrorist. How often do you see our media identify terrorist groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Popular Resistance Committees? How often do we see them identify them as terrorist groups, even though our government, on the Canada Gazette, which is our publicly listed repository for listed terrorist entities, lists them as terrorist groups, but our media oftentimes don't tell that to Canadian citizens. It wasn't told to readers today in the Toronto Star, if you read this news article about the recent violence, that you didn't hear that Hamas is a terrorist group. In fact, it narrowed things down and telescoped it to a skirmish and violence that had ensued, rather than this being a campaign of terror that's been waged on Israel's borders for the past decade. Yes. That's actually funny. If you didn't hear it, I'm going to repeat it. Most journalists, where are they based? They're in Jerusalem. They're in Jerusalem because Israel is a very vibrant free press. The safety of journalists is embargoed. The Israeli government doesn't hound journalists. There are no secret police who are following the footsteps of journalists, telling them who they can and cannot speak to. Contrast this to the broader Middle East and Arab world, where if you go to Lebanon, you're going to have Hezbollah minders who are going to follow you and are going to sequester you and tell you who you can't speak to. Go to places like Iran, if you can even get in. And there's a very real potential that you'll be arrested, detained for months, years on end, or murdered, as was the case with Zara Kazmi, a Canadian photojournalist who was murdered by the Iranian authorities. Now, there's a very big difference between the free expression that exists in Israel versus that is totally lacking in the broader Middle East. But I think what is a very serious element of media bias is that our media don't acknowledge this. They don't acknowledge the fact that Israel is a free society, and in the broader Middle East there exists a fierce society where to report critical of autocrats, to report critical of terrorist regimes, puts you in the crosshairs, puts you in serious danger, and not just yourself, but that of your families. And it is our media's job to sort of pierce the veil on that and to tell the truth about that. But you're right. Most of the journalists are in Israel. Most are in Jerusalem because they can file a story from the confines of a beautiful hotel. If they have to go to Ramallah, they'll take a 20 or 30-minute cab ride, come back to save Israel, have some Muslim level, and they're done with their day. What's really interesting is you have all of these journalists that are really crammed into these unfortunately, a very underlying sort of a bias for favoring the underdog. And when you think about it, when you have 500 journalists who are posted to the region, which marks Israel is the third highest concentration of journalists in the world, next to Moscow and to Washington. They aren't reporting out of Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they really should be. They should be reporting about what's going on in Zimbabwe. But I have to be pragmatic, because if you're a journalist and you have a family, how many people are likely to go and jump into a real hotspot like that? You have to keep that in mind in terms of understanding why there is certain coverage. And we also have to consider another impediment to doing good reporting on the Middle East is, quite honestly, the news is a business. We have to really consider that whether we like it or not, maybe a newspaper like the Toronto Star, which had a very sensational headline, like we just saw death in Gaza, maybe the reason that they appropriated that headline was because they wanted to sell copies. They wanted to really entertain the reader. I think it's unfortunate, but that's one of the realities. How many times have we seen a headline from the Toronto Star talking about rockets being fired to Israel? Why couldn't that have been a headline? That Israel under the brunt of terror, again, hundreds of rockets. For whatever reason, and this is part of the mindset of an editor, because this was a wire source, their editor elected to portray it in a certain perspective. But when we don't see that on a daily basis Israel is up against serious terror, when our media don't show that because maybe, let's say, JCPenney or the Gap needs to put an ad into the paper, and because of that, that story might have been bumped, that's a real problem. So we really need to push for a fuller, more fulsome picture of the Middle East. Yes, America? Sure. So, for example, let's say that it's a very heavy day for news ads. There needs to be a 2-page spread for General Motors. And this is, I'm not saying that you can't avoid this, but a newspaper can only allow for a certain amount of pages. It costs money to put out a paper. So let's say that they an editor wanted to put out a news story about a recent terror attack, but was impeded from doing so because they only had so many news pages to put up in contrast to the amount of ad pages. So I think when it comes down to it, a newspaper, I'm speaking about newspapers specifically, not broadcasting and online, is at times more interested in increasing circulation, in increasing profit, decreasing costs, than it really is in terms of getting the total story out. Yes?
Sorry, I'm a bit late, so I'm not sure. Well, I haven't heard all the media. Like, we have a friend, a great person, but she works for CBC, and I think there's also the tone of the entity, right, CBC. Even though she's a great person, like on Israel, there are two sides, and that seems to be, like, if you want to work for that organization, I think that's going to be your bed.
So
You have to fit into that, into that mindset.
I think I would say that I don't believe that a news organization has an agenda against Israel. I don't think it's the case. I think it's the byproduct of a lot of serious impediments. I think there are certainly exceptional instances where you're going to have journalists who favor a certain party line, and we've isolated many of those instances and we've critiqued them. I'll give you one example, as you mentioned CBC. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, CBC The National, which there, balanced reporting, and reasonable conclusions. I'm going to go through each one. For factual accuracy, it's very important that they get reliable sources. Oftentimes, you'll see what are called tape talks, which is live television reports where the media outlets will interview a source, not talking about the fact that they have really poor credentials, and then oftentimes they make unsubstantiated allegations which don't conform to the truth, and our media don't challenge some of the claims. So, question number one, would you trust Hamas for news about the Middle East? Is Hamas an objective news source? This is an organization that is a terrorist organization. How can we trust them? Let's keep this in mind. A couple of years ago, BBC featured this news story. Headline, Gaza youth shot dead in border incident. Their lone source, a Hamas spokesperson. What ends up happening? Israel obviously has to do its investigation. After doing its investigation, what happens? 3 days later, Gaza boy reported killed, returns home. Never happened. This was a totally fictitious incident, and it took some diligence on the Israeli government's behalf. But all the media really had to do, instead of going forward with a rush to judgment, which was to put out this story because somebody had made this claim, somebody who lacked credibility, they put out that story. And the repercussions are very severe. Thousands of people were misled into believing that the Israelis had murdered an innocent boy, whereas the fact of the matter is it didn't happen. Here's another, I mentioned the other example from the Swedish newspaper, Aftonbladet, where they had alleged that the Israelis harvest Palestinian organs. A lot of people said this is reminiscent of an old age medieval blood libel. Now, when this journalist, his name is Dalton Bostrom, when he was challenged to prove what he had actually said, this was his actual quote on the record. I want it to be investigated, that's true, but whether it's true or not, I have no idea. I have no clue. This is from the journalist. This was a front-page story. If there are any practicing journalists or even fair-minded people in this audience who know you can't put out a story with such a serious narrative as they had done without the very basics of fact-checking, and they didn't. And that was the narrative that they put out. Another one, proper terms and definitions. How do our media describe Israel's current government and specifically its prime minister? We always see the term hardline. So there you see the BBC. Now, hardline, the definition means somebody who's not open to compromise, somebody who is belligerent, somebody who's not interested in the dialogue. But when it comes down to it, Netanyahu is constantly supported the two-state solution, has put a moratorium on settlements for 10 months, which he had done to prompt the Palestinians back to peace negotiations. Didn't happen. He's the first Israeli prime minister to not create new settlements and has only allowed for the expansion of settlements for natural growth, and has said I'm willing to make painful concessions to secure a peace with the Palestinian counterpart. And yet, our media, and this is the Globe and Mail, which is considered our paper of record, they refer to a guy like Khaled Mashal, who's thankfully rumored to be stepping down from Hamas. They refer to him as a relative moderate. A moderate compared to who? This is an organization that just because it wears a suit and a white collar doesn't mean that it has an agenda to wipe Israel from the map. Either that.
Isn't he in fact, in the context of Hamas, some of these other people are like black jets.
Somebody who still advocates for the genocide of Jewry, as he does, is still, I think that's as bad as you get. But the article actually says in it, and it identifies him also as a moderate. And he says, we will never recognize Israel or cease fighting for our land. And there's a lot of duplicity anyhow with respect to what he'll say to a Western audience versus what he'll say to a domestic audience as well. Again, the definition of hardline, firm, uncompromising, inflexible, not willing to make concessions. And the term moderate is not intense, not violent, not rigorous, or severe. So it's pretty clear. So are the media using the proper terms? Facts, not disguising your opinion as news, and keeping your personal opinions out of a story. As a journalist, a practicing reporter, you can't insert your own personal opinion. As a commentator, you can't. Somebody who's a columnist or pundit, they a couple of years ago, Israelis go to polls to choose between 3 warmongers. Now, obviously, the impression of the headline writer was these 3 people, which is Tzipi Livni, then opposition leader of Kadima, not anymore, Ehud Barak, the defense minister, and Benjamin Netanyahu. These are the warmongers. These are people who committed war crimes according to the headline appropriated by the standard. Again, this is not a neutral and objective headline. This is a big issue, how Jerusalem is described. Now, The Guardian, in its own style guide, says, not only is Jerusalem not the capital of Israel, Tel Aviv is. Tel Aviv. Now, the issue of Jerusalem and its status is something that is always going to be debated at this time. But however you want to square the issue, Tel Aviv is not Israel's capital. Israel claims Jerusalem as its capital, but The Guardian has chosen to describe Tel Aviv as its capital. Now, we took The Guardian to task, after legal complaints and press submissions, they finally relented and removed this advisory note to their reporters from its style guide. But you would have seen the term Jerusalem next to Tel Aviv in almost all of the bylines of their reporting. Providing context, providing necessary information. And one of the real challenges right now in our day and age, with the flow of digital information and the unfortunate impatience of readers, is that news has often been condensed to very short briefs. There is not as much feature reporting as we would have used to have seen probably 5 or 10 years ago. Most news stories are below 600 words, not as many over 1,000, because of this context about really what might be the most complex issue to report on today, the Arab-Israeli conflict. We oftentimes don't see about the history dating back decades ago. So here's an example. How did Agence France-Presse cover an incident of terror where a terrorist had taken over a bulldozer in Jerusalem and went on a rampage? Agence France-Presse, by the way, is a wire source that's disseminated across the world. So their coverage is this. The headline, Jerusalem bulldozer driver shot dead at police. Not terror attack by Palestinian attacker attacking Israelis. It was the Israelis were the aggressors. We see that oftentimes, and we see that today in the Toronto Star's headline. There's another thing that you should look at, and I hope that, I guess ultimately I'm hoping that you can walk away from this presentation being our eyes and ears out there, as much as I'm a media watchdog doing my work, that you can be part of our grassroots initiative of 30,000 members to hold me accountable by looking at what they're actually putting out. But check out photos and captions, because they're oftentimes revealing. So here's a photo. This is from 2008, which had alleged that the Israelis had shut off the power in Gaza, claimed it wasn't true. And because of that, the Palestinian legislators, the lawmakers, had to meet in this secluded room in a basement, and they had to use candles because there was no light. But what's really interesting, and it came out, the truth came out after a little bit of scrutiny, is if you look at the upper left, you see that the curtains are closed. And you can see there's a glimmer of light. The glimmer of light because it's actually daylight out. They had the opportunity to open up those blinds, and it would have been as clear as day. They would have met in the brightest of light. But they intentionally chose to stage a photo for the benefit of Western photographers and a Western audience to present a narrative that the Israelis are, creating this horrible blackout for the Palestinians. Claim that wasn't even true, but they tried to even perpetuate it by staging a scene. And the photographers who were there had to have known this. They had to have known that it was the light of day, and that if there were, imagine that there were some curtains over there, all they had to do was open them up instead of lighting these redundant candles. But they didn't. story that talked about their grievances for being in detention, talking about alleged maltreatment. Not once did the reporter talk about what brought these detainees even into jail. The fact that these people have serious terror residence, and the Israeli Foreign Ministry responded saying there was a lot of missing context. Those who were arrested for their direct involvement in promoting terror, whether they sponsored it, directed it, or were actually involved in terror. But this wasn't referenced in the New York Times report. Drawing reasonable conclusions. You have to have an objective analysis and use relevant statistics. As we all know, Israelis overwhelmingly support a two-state solution. The people and the government. That's just sort of that poll that shows the statistics. And yet, what does Time Magazine put out? You might have seen this headline. I don't know if there's any readers of Time Magazine, but there you have the headline, and the news report followed this narrative. It was by Carl Vick, and it says, "Why Israel Doesn't Care About Peace." Now, it's pretty clear he wasn't just talking about the Israeli government, but he was also saying the Israeli people. He said Israel. And that really is, it's contrary to historical record, because Israelis do support a two-state solution. They do support peace overtures. And I think Richard's going to talk a lot about the two-state solution and its potential. And I'm very excited for that. It's going to be great. But Time Magazine really told a false version of what's actually taking place. So to be able to be a watchdog, to do sort of what I do and what our members do, is to be informed. I think you guys have done that very well by coming to you today, being a part of this terrific conference that Ellie and her crew has put together. And you have to monitor very critically, not just accept what you're reading as being total truth. One of the easiest tools that I use just to sort of ascertain the facts from fiction is just by comparing and contrasting a couple different media outlets. If I notice that two news outlets put out reporting on a similar issue, I'll be able to see if there's two different statistics that they're putting out. I'll be able to see who was given different placement in terms of sources that were used, the length of the news articles. So just a simple comparison is very helpful. Do some research. I got to be honest, I don't have anything that is very proprietary. I'll call up the sources sometimes to make sure they're accurately quoted and that there was context. I'll just do a simple Google search to find out about some of the history to see if it's actually true. And I'll be honest, our reporters make mistakes. They are human. We have to be conscious of that. When we meet with the media, when we speak to them, when we engage with them, we have to be diplomatic. We can't accuse the media of being anti-Semitic. I've never made the allegation in my entire 10-year career. Yes?
I'm sorry, but all the media, regardless of where they come from, I'm from France. Everything they say about what's going on in Israel is that they say Israel is killing X numbers of Arabs in Gaza. Nobody says in the title, the Arabs started to send rockets. Every newspaper all just show what Israel does as retaliation. And it's hard to say that they are not really doing this on purpose.
So I would say, instead of, I try to look beyond who's doing the reporting and look at the news organization itself and critique them. I want to ensure that their standards of journalism are being adhered to. I'm not denying that you shouldn't confront that. You absolutely should. I just think that unless you can point with facts to prove your claim that there is a consistent pattern of bias, then maybe you shouldn't. But if you can, then absolutely use that at your disposal. There's no question about that.
You touched on something very interesting just this moment. You said that reporters are human. I argue that many of the news agencies may not be specifically biased, but they're writing what the reporters give them. The reporters are out there in the field. Israel's got a lot of reporters, and these guys got to write or photograph something almost every day. I'm a journalist in Israel. I went to the American Colony Hotel some years back, and I let it be known, this was experimental, I let it be known that I carried press credentials. Within about 10 minutes, I was offered cards, pictures, access to anybody I want. I interviewed Yasser Arafat. No problem, great access. Food, parties, women, drinks, everything. if I'm lucky, there's a cup of coffee. And I have to go through a massive security. Now this guy's not sitting there, he's got to write something. He's going to write about his buddies. We cannot neglect it.
Absolutely. And it's something that should be acknowledged is there is a very real PR element that goes on. Not just, I gotta be honest, not just in Israel. You go anywhere around the world at any meet, there are people who are trying to get a certain message out. That's true. But I will say that Israel's enemies have done a very good job in surfacing journalists. It's something that we actually have an affiliate called Media Central that also tries to replicate that. We try to take journalists on tours of, whether it's the barrier or tours of Haifa to show that Israel's say that because media outlets are hesitant and resistant to the impact of lobby groups or special interest groups. With that said, we as an organization have always valued relationships. We've always tried to avoid stridency and always tried to be moderate. One thing that I try to do quite often is meet with reporters, meet with journalists, meet with editors, and over time we've been able to create really good dynamic relationships. It's something that we do and something that our members do as well. Something as simple as picking up a phone and calling a reporter saying, I'm not sure if you're aware that Israeli scientists just created this new cancer-fighting drug, something to that effect. If you're talking about a sort of a proactive perspective, a lot of the times it might resonate for a certain journalist, and they might pick up the story. And we have a lot of successful examples to show that you can engage in a proactive posture. The mindset of honest reporting when you first
instead of focusing on trades to give them a vocation, it's actually communications and all aspects of communications. So that's just to add to your comment about developing communications or customer service with communications, media. That's what I do.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, your question, I guess, was concluded.
I was wondering how successful and how much contact you have with the universities, and whether they're receptive, kids are receptive.
They are. They are. I'm going to speak about the students and maybe not the administration as much, but because we're brought in by student groups, although I did speak at Ryerson last week, but very receptive and has been successful. And we actually have an effort to monitor the campus media as well. Our challenge there is the standards of journalism aren't the same as and the credibility as some of the mainstream publications. But it's something I welcome going out to universities. I think one of my challenges, and
Thank you.